Hey guys, it's time for the last fuckboy of the month of 2018. So this one, I have to admit, is kind of weak. It's kind of on the weaker side, but it's still a pretty good story, and I think some of you might even think that I was the fuckboy in this story by the end of it. So let me go right into it. And as always, I love your comments on these videos, so let me know what you think of this. So this guy we're gonna call Sebastian. Sebastian was the last guy who I was chatting with before I left New York City, before I moved out of New York City. He was the last guy that there was like a chemistry with and an interest in. And obviously, based on the title of this video, it didn't work out. So I can admit that he was kind of like one of those last daggers in me that made me go, I'm ready to leave this city. I'm ready to leave New York. I'm ready to start fresh because I'm sick of having the same experience with men, with professional stuff, with just my mood in general. So he was part of, not directly, but I guess subconsciously part of my decision to finally like start fresh and leave New York City. So I met Sebastian on Tinder. He was straight from Puerto Rico, had only been in New York City for I think like 6 months, so he was basically brand new. He had just graduated from dentistry school and he was now a practicing dentist. I think he was in residency or whatever the equivalent is for dentists in New York City. Really cute, really smart, really nice, all those things. The conversation was easy and it flowed, and he would ask me questions about myself, which is always really pleasant since there's so many guys on apps who make zero effort. And I have to say that out of all those years that I lived in New York City, he's the only guy I ever matched with on an app, or who I ever communicated with on an app, a dating app, who from start to finish always made an effort in terms of communication. Like he never got to a point where he stopped being responsive or where he stopped being proactive. That had never happened to me. And especially considering for how long I ended up talking to him, it was pretty impressive, but I'll talk about that in a sec. So we started chatting and it seemed clear that he wanted to get to know me and vice versa, that I wanted to get to know him. And then about a week or two after talking, I got this crazy eye infection. Now, I'm a pretty healthy person, but New York City, for anybody who's lived in New York City, you know that only in New York City have I ever gotten like crazy illnesses. A, it's a very crowded city. B, it's polluted. And C, you know, with the subway and stuff, there's just, I feel like there's germs everywhere and you see rats everywhere, and I cringe when I think about it. I'm so glad to be gone from New York City, but I got this crazy eye infection and it was pink eye and it was viral, which means that I couldn't just take medicine to make it go away. I had to wait for it to run its course. I never thought in a million years that I would get an eye infection that would last over a month. So I still went about my day. Every day it was painless, but it was this thing that was always there, just like an irritation in the eye. After the first few weeks, I think it was one of those things where I was just paranoid and I could see that it wasn't perfect yet, but the average person wouldn't like stare like, what's wrong with your eye? There's a very big difference between bacterial pink eye and viral pink eye. Bacterial, and I know you're like, why is he going into this lecture? But there is a point to this. The bacterial version is the one that's really, really gross looking, where you're like, ugh. Viral is more like your eye is really, really watery. And for me, it was just always like slightly swollen, like a little bit thinner looking than the other eye. So I was very self-conscious about it, to the point where after talking to Sebastian for a few weeks, I was like, at this point, I want to wait for this to be 100% better, because I don't want his first impression of me to be, you know, that boy with the eye issue. Like, that's not sexy, that's not fun. So the more we kept talking, the more I was like, I have to wait until this is perfect, because everything is so great with him so far, I don't want to ruin this. So this crazy eye infection went on for weeks and weeks. And I remember him one day finally being like, send me a pic. I want to see how bad this is. And I think that secretly he probably was wondering if I was trolling him, because it's just so weird. Like, how often do you talk to somebody who's like, oh, I'm still sick 3 weeks later? Like, it's not really standard, it's not normal. And I didn't want to send him a picture because I was embarrassed, but I also didn't want him to think I was lying to him. And finally I sent one to him and he was like, oh, okay, I understand. He was really good about it, really patient. He understood. He wasn't weirded out, I guess because he was from the world of healthcare and medicine. Like, he got that it was just a weird thing. And I was just grateful that he was still after weeks, still proactively reaching out, which, as I said, again, like has never happened with any other guy. So I couldn't wait to meet him at that point. So I was like, once this is healed, it will be perfect. So we talked for like 5 or 6 weeks, and he was so good about it and so patient. And finally I felt better. And so at that point, it's been a while that we've been communicating, and I was so ready and excited to meet him. So we finally decided to meet up. And that weekend, we hadn't really made any plans, but we had just said, we'll hang out, right? So I think I had texted him saying like, hey, when do you want to meet? That day that we were supposed to meet, and I don't hear back. And then I think I followed up an hour or so later, and I still didn't hear back. So at that point I was like, oh, this is yet another fuckboy. Like, how is this possible? We've been talking for weeks. Like, how does he just disappear? So that night I'm doing laundry because I'm like, clearly I don't have any other plans. And I remember it was that first like really hot day of spring where summer is approaching. And so I'm like sweaty while doing laundry. There's a point to this that I'm sharing this. I'm sweating at the laundromat, like stuffing clothes into, you know, the machine or whatever. And he texts me and he's like, hey, like what happened? Like, how come we didn't hang out? And I'm like, is he serious? Like, he didn't respond, right? So I said something kind of curt like that, like, you didn't respond, like, what do you mean? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I never heard from you today. And I'm like, huh? And I sent him a screenshot, and he's like, I did not get those messages. He sends me a screenshot, and there's no messages from me. So both of us were waiting for the other person basically to communicate. And it was one of those like, oh my God, like I can't believe I spent all day annoyed at this person, and this was just like a technology issue, right? So at that point, he was like, look, I'm now with my friend, we're out, he's visiting, my friend is visiting me, blah, blah, blah. But you're more than welcome to join us, which I thought was kind of cool of him to be like, okay, this got messed up, but like, you can still come through. And remember, I'm like sweating in the middle of doing laundry. It's like 10 p.m. in Harlem. I'm just like I just want to finish this and then like shower and go to bed. Like, I just wasn't in the right mood. And again, I wanted the first impression to be really great because I'd been talking to him for so long. So it just wasn't the right feel. So I thought, we'll meet up soon. So then, you know, since he made the effort there, I made the next effort and I said, hey, like, how about this week, which I guess was the week after, when are you free? And he said, well, either he had a family member or a friend visiting, and he said he was really busy, so it wasn't the right time, but how about the week after? The week after, I was in Miami on vacation, so that couldn't work. So when I'm in Miami, I remember he reached out to check in, and I was like, hey, sorry, I can't meet, I'm out of state, but you know, I'll check in when I come back. And then I came back the week after. At this point, it had been at least 2 months, maybe even 3 months that we had been texting consistently throughout, never a hiccup, never a weird lull. And I reach out and I'm like, hey, I'm finally back, finally ready to meet, like, let's do this. And so excited to meet him. And he didn't respond. For the first time in at least 2 months, he had not responded. And I thought that was very unusual, and I thought there had to be some logical reason, so I just kind of let it go, gave him some time. And then days later, I had a dentist appointment, which made me think of him. But let's be honest, I obviously was thinking about him anyway, because I was like, where's this boy? But it was the perfect opportunity to reach out because I was at the dentist. So I texted him and I was like, hey, I'm at the dentist, just thought of you, like, how are things going? And he responded almost immediately. And he said, hey, I know I've been MIA the past few days. I have to be honest with you, I'm dating somebody. And it was like out of a movie because I remember it was rainy and I was in a crummy mood. I don't know if I'd not gotten sleep or whatever, but it was just a weird day, a weird, shitty, drizzly day. And I was excited to hear back from this guy who had been MIA the past few days. And then I see that text message on my phone that's like, sorry, I met somebody. And it just blew my mind because I had been talking to him for at least 2 months, like continuously. And I understand that I'm built differently than most people. Like, I'm probably more sensitive than the average person. So maybe to him, I was just a guy who, you know, he texted and it wasn't a big deal. But in my mind, that was the beginning of like, I don't know how to not be emotionally connected even a little bit to a guy who I'd been communicating with consistently for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I just couldn't believe that he didn't even want to like meet to see if maybe this could be a friendship. You know, it's not every day that you make a cyber friend without ever meeting, and yet the communication is like flowing and smooth from start to finish. So I said something like that. I was like, you don't even want to meet to see if, I don't know, to see who this person is? No response. Like in his mind, it was over, game over. He met somebody, time to move on. And I was so heartbroken over that because he lived in my neighborhood. He lived literally, I think like 2 blocks away from me. So it was so odd to me that we had been chatting for that long and now it was just game over. And then months later, I was coming home and I ran into him on the street because he lived a few blocks away from me. And we had this really awkward encounter where he shook my hand and was like, how are things going, da da da. But it was clear that he was just making small talk to be polite and he felt very uncomfortable. And he just walked off after I said, good, how are you? Good, okay, all right, I'm gonna go back to my laundry now. The irony, back to laundry. But he went off to pick up his laundry and I just stood there sort of shell-shocked that he was even cuter in person. And, you know, I feel like the average guy in New York City wouldn't even take the time or effort to shake hands and say, oh, it's you. They'd probably just keep walking. So this is why I said some of you guys might think that I was the fuckboy, because looking back, I wish that I had just met up with him even when I still felt self-conscious about my eye, even in those last few weeks where I was not horrible anymore, but I still felt like I looked off. I'm sure I could have just put on sunglasses and met up with this guy who had given me the time of day through the text and the Tinder messages. But you know, you can't predict the future. I was convinced we were gonna meet just because we were chatting for so long. I had no doubt in my mind that we would meet, and if nothing else, it would be a friendship. And obviously, had I known, I would have just met up with him that night when I was doing laundry. I would have showered and met him, but you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't realize it would ever end up that way, that this guy I had talked to for like 3 months via texting would just like dip once somebody else came along. I kind of tortured myself with this whole situation at the time because it almost felt like a sign that it just like was not meant to be. I mean, what are the chances that only time in my life I have this crazy illness that takes up weeks to recover? On top of that, we're supposed to meet, and that one day the text messages aren't going through. Like, how odd is that? And then after that, he's busy one week, I'm busy that week, and then just like bam, he met somebody who now I guess he's committed to, which I suppose must mean that the whole time, or a significant portion of the time, he was talking to that guy, and then it got serious and I missed my shot. But I remember being really freaked out, that I was like, is this a sign from the universe that like I'm not allowed to date, I'm not supposed to date? Like, I didn't know what to think. People always talk about you attract things into your life, and I've had friends tell me that I must pick the wrong guys, or you know, things happen when you don't search for it. And that mentality has always made me uncomfortable because that makes me think that almost like you don't have free will. Like you don't get to decide what you want. And I never want to live my life that way. I want to do things that I want to do and seek things, whether it's professional endeavors, friendships, relationships, on my terms, not just because the universe willed it. So to this day, I still don't really understand if that was just complete bad luck, that the one guy who has been normal and respectful from start to finish, the only guy who's ever been totally responsive, totally communicative, it just couldn't work out with. I don't know if it was bad luck or maybe it was just another sign that I needed to leave New York City. I don't know. I don't know what to believe, but I'm really curious what you guys think about this story.